Hey everyone, welcome back to the Untrivial Podcast. My name is Allie Nelson. Happy New Year, happy 2025. I hope you all had a great start to the year, and I hope you had a chance to take a little break over the holidays, connect with loved ones, and take a little bit of time for yourselves. I feel like sometimes the holidays get so crazy, you don't even feel like you had a rest. And luckily for us, we had a lot of good connecting family time at the beginning, and then a lot of relaxing time towards the end where we just kind of laid around, chilled out, and hung out just us. We're in a new year, and I thought that there was no better way to kick off 2025 than with a conversation about getting unstuck and finding your path. My guest today is Britt Frank. Britt is a psychotherapist, speaker, and the author of The Science of Stuck: Breaking Through Inertia to Find Your Path Forward. This book is just one of those books where I felt like I had aha moments almost every chapter. Like my copy is just highlighted everywhere because there are just so many amazing bits of information that really changed the way I understand myself and why I do what I do. This book isn't really like a typical self-help book or like a motivational habit stacking kind of book. It really is a deeper look at to why we get stuck, why we stay stuck, and how to address those areas by looking more inward. Today, Britt and I discuss where people commonly feel stuck in life, why our brains like to stay in familiar patterns, shadow work and the unconscious parts of us, parts work, micro goals, and so much more. Britt is such an inspirational person. She is super authentic and real in her approach. And so I really hope you enjoy this conversation with her. I have, of course, linked her socials, her website, and the links to her books in the show notes below. And so you can check her out at any of those places. And now let's get into the episode. Britt Frank, welcome to the Untrivial Podcast. How are you doing today?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to be speaking with you today. You are, of course, the author of The Science of Stuck: Breaking Through Inertia to Find Your Path Forward. You're also a licensed clinical social worker, and I would just love to hear a little bit more about you and your background. So first of all, what is your background and how did writing this book come to be?
Yeah, so my professional background is I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and my specialty is in trauma, the brain, and the nervous system. And so I've really spent my career getting specialized in somatic experiencing, and that's a type of therapy that focuses on your body, that we don't live in floating heads. We all live in bodies, and they do things, and it's helpful to know how to drive them. And I'm also trained in a model called internal family systems. And that works with all the different parts of us, like your inner critic and the voice in your head that says, maybe don't watch another YouTube video, you should sleep. And the voice that says, just one more. How to really work with that instead of feeling like you're fighting yourself. And so my, sordid personal background is I did not come to the field of therapy from a healthy, happy, functional childhood/adulthood. I had a pretty chaotic upbringing and an even more chaotic early adulthood. And so in finding my way to this work as a client, I just fell in love with it. I would love to say I became a therapist to help people. Like, it's great that I do, and that's wonderful, but it was more, I love this work. I love knowing about this work. And I think everybody should know about the stuff, because when I found out about it, life got really much better.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're so raw and honest in your book. And I love hearing kind of your personal experiences and your background of everything that you've moved through. And I think it's so true. All of us can benefit from understanding why we are the way we are, why we do what we do. Of course, it seems so obvious, but I think for a lot of people, it's something they really don't put a lot of focus onto in their life.
It's so true. And I'm certainly not someone that's saying you have to do therapy or that everyone has a bad childhood or trauma. But I mean, if your life's working for you, that's great. Like, that's awesome. My hunch is if people are listening to this, it's because maybe there's an area or two where we're feeling stuck. And that's really why that book is The Science of Stuck, and not here are the inner workings of trauma, because not everyone has trauma overtly, and everyone knows what it's like to be stuck. And that seems to be a very human dilemma, by whatever name you call it. Stuckness is a pretty universal experience. Not all of life's sticky problems get solved. Not everything has a fix, but there's so much within our control that I really wanted to write something that would be a really user-friendly, here's how to drive your brain 101 kind of thing.
I love that. And yeah, for me, when I first picked up the coffee, I was almost thinking of it more as my assumption was, oh, I'm going to learn how to, motivate myself or get, a little bit more encouragement to get myself unstuck from the situation. But it is so different than that. It is so much more than that. So for anyone listening, if you're thinking like, oh, a self-help book about motivation, no, 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 that is not what your book is. And I love it for that because you talk about all these different areas in life that people can feel stuck in our relationships, in our work, in just all these different areas of life. And so I'd love if you could kind of just shine a light on some of the main areas where people feel most commonly stuck, and then we can understand really what's behind that.
So, because we live in a very social media, Insta expert kind of world, it's really important to me to disclaim that my work doesn't focus on stuckness as it relates to social inequality or oppression or, any of that stuff. The work that I focuses on assumes that we have solved for choices and safety and basic needs.
Hmm.
So if someone is growing up in an abusive environment, I wouldn't say you're stuck. I'd say you're in an abusive environment. If
Right.
someone's trapped in a domestic violence situation, I wouldn't say you're stuck. I would say you're being abused. And so, again, having done that, it's really difficult when you talk about choice because it can get victim blaming. So my disclaimer on the front end is I'm assuming that we've solved for some of those basic things. Now, that said, generally, the areas I see the stuckness thing happen are the F words, strangely: finances, fitness, family, friends, and the other F word that we, all enjoy doing from time to time. Really big stuck areas. And finances isn't just what's in your bank account, but it's your career, your job, your purpose, which may or may not include getting paid for what you love. Purpose doesn't have to be vocation. But yeah, we get stuck somewhere. I've yet to see a person, no matter how high functioning, no matter how at the top of their game, and I've worked with some very high level people, everyone gets stuck. When I ask a room full of high level people, who in here knows what it's like to be stuck, every hand is raised.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And even if you're not stuck in 3 areas, maybe you're stuck in another, or maybe
Yeah,
you're stuck in a couple, and that's okay. And there's all these different strategies of how to move through that. But how you start the book is really understanding how and why we are stuck. And one of my favorite quotes from the book is that we are wired for survival, not happiness. Let's talk about that. What do you mean by that?
that one's sort of confronting. It's like, wait, what do you mean? But obviously our brains are complex and there's so much that we don't understand. And I say this in the book. Anyone who says like, this is how your brain works, period, end scene, I'd be like, well, no, it's a little more complicated than that. Generally, broadly speaking, our brains are not like our cell phones. Our cell phones are designed to update every few months. We get a new operating system. Brains are still the same as they were when we were living in caves and trying to outrun lions and tigers and bears. I mean, imagine if you were still using the first version of your cell phone. Our brains haven't updated. And so the primary design of the human brain is energy conservation and like looking for patterns so it doesn't consume as much energy, and survival. And so it's like, why doesn't my brain care about my productivity goals? Well, it can, but it's primarily focused with the lions, not with joining the 5 a.m. club and being a boss lady.
No, it's so true. And I think that reframe for a lot of people, including myself, was, oh, it's not necessarily that I lack motivation. It's that our brains are wired to be this way. We're wired to conserve energy. It's not crazy that I'm not interested or feeling really excited to go to the gym at 5 a.m. My brain and my body want to sleep because that's what's most important to my brain and body. And I think just even framing it that way is like, whew, like it kind of takes the pressure off yourself to stop beating yourself up over some of these things that are so wired into how we are. But also you talk a lot about things too that are maybe not wired for everyone, but based on our childhood experiences, based on our life experiences, they are kind of our groove of how we operate in the world and how we move through things.
Exactly. And again, when I talk about survival brain being the dominant default setting, it's not an excuse. When I used to have a kids therapy practice, so I did play therapy with kids and teens, and they would learn some of this and be like, "Mom, I don't need to do my homework because my brain is in energy conservation mode." And it's like, no, 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 no. That is not what's happening here. We're not talking about you get to excuse everything because survival brain, but it does explain it. And like you just said, when we beat ourselves up, when we go on this shame spiral of what's wrong with me, I'm not enough, why can't I? That's not just a mental thing. Like when we yell at ourselves, our very beautiful, very literal brains think that we're being yelled at. Like it doesn't differentiate between me yelling at me and you yelling at me. Well, when someone yells at you, what do? You release stress hormones because now you're in defensive mode. And when you have lots and lots of stress hormones, that's going to either shut you down so you're not, quote, motivated, or it's going to speed you up so you can't focus, or you're going to bebop between both. And then it's like, I'm both wired and tired. I am so tired I want to sleep, but I can't sleep. That's when that's the brake pedal, gas pedal at the same time, revving the
Right.
engine situation. But it's so helpful to take shame out of the equation. And the science does that, which is very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You also talk a little bit about some of the perks of staying stuck. It's not like I think if there were zero perks, we probably wouldn't be there, but there actually are some benefits to being stuck. So what are those? You talk about 4 Ps.
There are so many benefits. And that one, again, is really almost aggravating. It's like, wait a minute. Obviously, I know my life will be better if I don't drink a bottle of wine a night, if I go to the gym. Like, how can you say there are benefits to being stuck? And again, it's not about blaming and shaming. It's like, let's look at this like we would a business. Any business knows you have to look at the costs and the benefits. Like you need to do a cost benefit analysis when you're making decisions. When it comes to our stuckness, it's very easy to look at the costs. This is costing me my health. This is costing me my sleep. This is costing me my relationships. But the benefit column is not empty. If it was, the behavior wouldn't be there. And so some of the benefits of being stuck are that stuckness does point towards problems. Like when you're stuck, that's information. It also helps promote connection. It's really easy to be with a group of people who are all feeling stuck. When you start getting up and living your life and going after your goals, your circle's going to shrink. I was sort of horrified to discover that when I started getting healthy, all the people around me disappeared. And so, misery loves company, and making healthy choices sometimes requires new playgrounds, new playmates, and that can be lonely. So stuckness does give you good company. When I was stuck, I know when I was using drugs, when I was in party mode, I never lacked for people to do those things with. But at first, it was hard to find my people when I was coming out of that.
And transferring groups, I guess, would be challenging too, because if you stay with the people who continue to be stuck, you'll hear things like, you changed, or, oh, you're not fun anymore. What happened? And you haven't necessarily found the people who are the right type of people for your next phase of life, who will be encouraging and alongside you in those kind of healthier habits.
Exactly. And it's unpleasant and unfortunate. A lot of people that I work with and myself, it's like, I want to stay friends with my friends. I want everybody to know this. I want everyone to quit using drugs because having done both using and not using, I can attest not using is better, in my opinion. But not everyone wants to take that ride or go on that journey. And part of the healing, growing, up-leveling, whatever you want to use to call it, part of that process needs to involve a degree of grief. All change, even awesome, healthy, positive change, will also come with a loss. And even though it's good to not use drugs, I still had to grieve that that's what I knew when I, stopped using my eating disordered behaviors. Eating disorders were with me longer than anything else. I started disordered eating as soon as I knew how to eat. And so that was a loss. So we have to grieve not just when people die, but any type of change is going to require at least an acknowledgement that there's a loss here to be processed and to be worked through.
Yeah. And I think some people, myself included, would struggle with that, almost feeling bad for feeling loss for something you kind of can rationally know is not great for you. And it's like, why do I feel bad that this isn't happening in my life anymore when it was destructive. And, like even trying to not get mad at yourself for feeling sad, even though you're making these positive steps and like positive changes.
That's where the word "and" is really beautiful when it comes to the wellness journey. I am happy to no longer be struggling with an eating disorder every day. And I do miss the ritual of it. It occupied a lot of my brain space. To be obsessed about food all of the time meant I wasn't thinking about or feeling about anything else. I can be sad and miss my old friends and know that the loneliness is temporary and I will find my way to new ones. So the word "and" allows for the complexity of our lives to all exist simultaneously at the same time. Like, we're not all one thing. It's okay. I feel bad for feeling bad because this was bad. It's like, great, but you do. So let's just do that, because that's going to get you where you want to go faster.
That's so true. Yeah, I think a lot of people live in the either or, and so much of the world is and nuanced and gray. And you have such a good perspective on that. One thing that comes to mind when I think about being stuck, you mentioned, the F of fitness. And I think that's one a lot of people can relate to. A lot of people have health and fitness goals, and even just struggling with that motivation or dedication and discipline to get up and go on that run or go to the gym. But almost in this world and people who are kind of attuned to the idea of self-care, how do we tell the difference between something like, I'm tired and I need rest, being, self-care in that resting state, or I'm just avoiding going to the gym because I don't want to? And like, how do we differentiate what kind of day it is?
That's tricky, because some days self-care is taking the run and some days self-care is not getting out of bed. And so context is very helpful. It's not just, I should meal prep. It's like, okay, but what's the context? Well, this week, my parents are in town and my sister is sick and I'm taking care of her 4 kids plus my 5. And I have 4 donkeys in the back that need to be fed. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up. If that's the context, then your lack of meal prep makes a lot of sense.
Right.
If the context is, for the last 4 days, you've been grinding at 100 miles an hour because your partner is out of town and blah, 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 that it's a lot easier to figure out, is this self-care or is this avoidance, if you take the context into consideration instead of just focusing on, why can't I do the thing? It's like, well, first let's figure out what's your context and does that make your thing make sense? And then if it does, problem solved. Or not solved, but we've solved for shame. What's wrong with me? Nothing. You're sick and you've got a bunch of kids to take care of and there's no time in the day for everything. So, okay, what are my choices is a much better use of our energy than what's wrong with me.
I love that. That is so helpful. And I will definitely start taking context into consideration, because I don't think I do that. I'm just like, do I want to do that today? Yes, no.
Right. And that our feelings are really terrible at being in charge of deciding what, because like objectively, leg day feels bad, cocaine feels good. So in a moment, going by what's going to feel comfortable or good is not a great indicator of what's in my best interest. Context very much matters.
Definitely not. And you talk in your book about shadow work and almost this idea of the unconscious sometimes calling the shots or making those moves, and shadow work being that way of making the unconscious conscious. Or how do you describe shadow work, and how do you kind of recommend people move through that if that's something that you think they need?
Well, I would never tell someone that's what you need, but I find that most people very quickly, if you're actually sitting there and asking yourself what's needed, shadow work is going to come up. So there's that. I think it's great. First, let's demystify it, because I love archetypes and mythology and depth psychology, but the idea of shadow work can be off-putting reasonably to people, because it sounds like, what's that? What's shadow work? It sounds like some Halloween movie. So there's nothing mysterious about this. So how do shadows happen in nature? Like, if I hold my hand up to block the light, I'm going to cast a shadow on the wall. Anytime light is blocked, a shadow appears. And so shadow work is talking about awareness being blocked. So anything that is blocked from your awareness, it could be your bad habits, but it could also be your strengths. Lots of people are unaware of how awesome they are, how brilliant they are, how beautiful and magical and wonderful they are. But if that's not if that's not in your conscious awareness, that's going to become a shadow. Shadow work is about taking everything that you are that's not accessible to you and then making it accessible, at which point you can say, I like what I have found. I would like to keep that. Or this is not awesome. What are my choices to work with it? Or like any other option. I guess keep it, toss it, or upcycle it would be kind of how you can look at the mental decluttering that shadow
Yeah.
work does.
Marie Kondoing your
Your
brain.
minds. Yeah.
And then what would be the difference between shadow work and parts work? Because that's another thing you talk about and recommend in the book as well.
So parts work, which is my favorite. I just love parts work so much. And it's the subject of my third book, which will be out next year. Parts work is based on the idea that within our minds, there are so many different aspects or parts. And most people are familiar with this. It's in our language. Part of me knows I should go to the gym and part of me wants to lay in bed. Part of me knows it's good for me to go out with friends and part of me wants to isolate and binge watch whatever your thing is. So parts work recognizes that our minds are not this one single unified blob of being. We're multiples. Like everyone has multiple personalities. What would happen if they could all get along? And that's what parts work does. And again, it sounds really confronting. It's like, what do you mean I have multiple personality disorder? No, no, that's first of all, we don't use that term anymore. Second of all complex things are made of parts. Like no one has a problem with you have one body and on that body are hands and arms and kidneys and lungs. It's like one thing made of parts. The desk I'm sitting at is one desk with legs and a top and screws and other things. So why are our minds treated as if they're any different? We have one mind. Within that mind, there are many parts. Now, to answer your question, shadow work is to help ferret out the parts that we're not totally comfortable with or that we're not aware of. But some people are very aware of their parts. The inner critic is a perfect example. I know nobody who is unaware of that mean voice telling you you're not enough. They're not going to like you. They're going to be mad at you. You're going to fail. You suck. It's like, that's not a shadow part. That part is very much in your awareness. But do you have any idea how wonderful you are? And people cringe and they shrink back. That's a shadow part. That would be worth exploration.
That is so interesting and scary almost to confront in yourself. And even I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea of the positives in themselves, which is so weird because we all have that harsh critic that I think runs the show pretty often for some people. I would put myself in that category, but it's like to almost sit and be like, wow, you're amazing. It feels like wrong.
It does. And people are like well-meaning, good-hearted people will say, but won't that make me a narcissist?
Yeah.
And it's like, no. When you are aware of how cool you are, how awesome you are, and not that you're full of yourself in an arrogant way, but when I'm filled with the knowledge that within myself, there are good things and bad things and amazing things and terrible things and lovely disciplined habits and horribly undisciplined, petty, icky things, then you're not going to become a narcissist. A narcissist isn't someone who's full of themselves. A narcissist is someone who is so empty of a sense of self that they have to hoof themselves up and take up everyone's space. Being connected with your shadows, good and bad, Jungians call them the golden shadows. Like, it's not just secretly you're jealous, it's also secretly you're brilliant. Connecting with your shadows gives you more access to who you are, so I can take up my space, not so I can take over yours. Narcissists are, let me take over your space. Self-work, parts work is about how can I take up all of this space that's mine to take up.
I want to talk about it in the context of a stuck area, just to give people an idea of how this would come to be. So if you could pick one of the areas where people are stuck, how would someone's shadow maybe get in the way of them finding success or doing that thing that they want to do? And what could that look like? Let's start there.
So we can talk in any area. We can say someone who wants to quit a corporate job and start a business. That's a biggie. Not that everyone has to, but there are plenty of people who they want to, and it would be scary and a jump, but the choice is there. Not everyone has that option. But let's assume that you could do it, but it would be scary, but you could. And let's assume that's what you want to do. So some of the shadows with starting a business are going to be the positive ones. Because when and I've done this, I've quit a corporate job and I've started a business, and it's like, who do you think you are? You're going to fail. You're going to be out on the street. Everyone's going to laugh at you. That's not shadow. When I wanted to leave the comfort of a 9 to 5 with a paycheck and benefits, I was very aware of my lack. I was very aware of my inadequacy. I was not as connected with my capacity, with my resilience, with my resourcefulness. And so when people come to me with that flavor of stuckness, it's not, let's find all your flaws. It's, we got to get all your strengths out of the shadow, because if you're going to sustain the journey of entrepreneurship, which is bumpy and turbulence, you're going to need to be connected with your strengths. Because if you're only connected with your flaws, you're pretty screwed. So we need access to all of it to do the big things. So that would be an example of shadow work with someone who's entrepreneur-minded.
That's so interesting. I think when I immediately think of shadow, I think bad, dark, scary, and you almost equate shadow with negative.
Yeah,
but
it's not.
It's not.
Mm-mm.
Wow, that's really interesting.
No, shadows are like shadows in nature are not negative. They're just the tree's blocking the sun and it's casting a shadow. And you're so right, especially in the more spiritually oriented wellness worlds area. This idea that shadow and dark equals bad and light equals good is just not true. So shadow is just about awareness versus lack of awareness. It has nothing to do with morally good or bad or negative or positive. It's just, what are you aware of? What are you unaware of? Now, yes, there are plenty of things in the shadow that are not pleasant. Most people are familiar with the comparison trap, right? And it's not a good look to see one of your friends killing it online and then feeling that little voice going, oh, I'm jealous. But if you're aware of it, it's not going to take over and it's not going to interfere with your relationships. All of our shadow parts are important members of our minds. There are no bad. Dr. Richard Schwartz, who invented internal family systems, and that's the model of parts work that I use. And he says, and I agree, there are no bad parts. Bad behaviors, yep, lots of them. But bad parts, no.
Yeah, I love how you say trauma or your shadow is not an excuse for bad behavior, but it's almost like this is why it's happening.
Yeah, you can explain anything. I mean, you can look at the most toxic behavior. I can explain it. It's like, yeah, well, if this is what happened and this is that, and then you get your big Pinterest murder board out where you have the red string. It's like, great, we've explained why it happened. That doesn't mean it's okay.
Right. In relationships, because I think a lot of people, I've heard of the shadow in the context of relationships a lot, in terms of them affecting your connection or harming the relationship because there's parts of you that are unhealed or that you're not fully aware of, where you're having big reactions or emotions that are getting in the way of connecting in your relationship. And I guess in this case, I'm talking about romantic relationships. But in the context of relationships, you talk about that in your book. So how might we get stuck in this realm?
Well, we can get stuck on both sides of being hyper fixated on the therapy. I think therapy speak has gotten very common in the dating world, in the online world. So now it's, you're anxiously attached and that's why, and you're a narcissist and you're gaslight. And like those things can happen. But the point of all of this isn't to diagnose our partner. It's to say to ourselves, what's true for me? What am I tolerating? Am I okay with this? So when people who are dating, and I get the dating world is tough, when they say to me, why didn't he call? I would say, well, are you okay with the fact that they didn't call? Why he didn't call isn't really relevant. Are you okay with this behavior? Are you going to tolerate it? What are your choices? That's a much better use of your energy. And so shadow work is not about finding the shadow in your partner. It's about using your triggers as little trails that lead you back to yourself. Now, again, if someone hits me, I wouldn't say that they're triggering me. That's not a trigger. That's being abused. So the word trigger has become synonymous with something bad is there, or like, I don't like it or whatever. But let's say you play a song, I don't know, whatever pop song. You play a pop song on the radio. That's neutral. You have not done anything wrong. But let's say that I got broken up with to that song. Now I hear that song on the radio in the car together and I start crying. That's a trigger. You didn't do anything bad. It's just a thing that reminded my brain of another thing. And that's what a trigger is. And sometimes when our partners upset us, they're not triggering us. They're being disrespectful or unkind or abusive or rude or whatever. That's not being triggered. But yeah, if my partner makes me a grilled cheese sandwich and I start screaming because my mother who abandoned me, the last thing she ever made me was a grilled cheese sandwich, that's a trigger. And that's my job to then kind of suss out what happened and why and how I might choose to deal with it. You don't always need to know
Right.
why, but if you're going from grilled cheese to screaming, that might be an area to explore.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What do you make of all this quote unquote therapy speak becoming a lot more common and kind of popular in day-to-day conversations and people just being more aware?
Well, I'd rather us all be talking too much about this stuff than not at all.
Mm.
I think it's great that it's no longer like therapy language is no longer being gatekept by people who are largely inaccessible to other people.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's a wonderful way to bypass personal accountability,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What's wrong with you? You are an avoidant attached person is a lot easier than I feel sad and rejected and abandoned. Maybe I should look at that. So I like it, and it has its it has its benefits, like being
And
stuck, and it has its costs.
yeah, I think I totally agree. I think a lot of people can take it way further than maybe is appropriate in the conversation or what information they've gathered. But I do like that it's the stigma is being reduced. More people can talk about it. Maybe that makes people more comfortable accessing therapy with someone who is licensed, who knows when and where those words and those, situations call for that type of conversation or those types of definitions like gaslighting, or if someone is truly a narcissist or if they're just
Right.
being a little selfish in the moment, like who knows? You guys
That's
know.
why I'm big, and I say this as a licensed clinician who I am empowered to diagnose. Like, I have the power to sign forms with diagnoses on them. But, like, why do we have to diagnose it? Can't we just call it, instead of gaslighting, like, you said to me that I didn't see what I see, and I know I saw what I saw, and I'm not okay with this dynamic. We don't have to call it anything. And again, I get that the terms can be, I mean, for me, learning about the terms, it was like, oh my God, this is a thing. And this is what that thing is called. That's great. But instead of you're being a narcissist, again, it's what am I tolerating and what are my choices here?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of another way people sometimes feel stuck in the context of relationships or dating overall, I think heard a lot of people in my age group, kind of like late 20s, early 30s. They're in the Hinge and Tinder and Bumble space. They're looking for a partner, but they're feeling super burned out by the process of dating or just feeling stuck in not really finding someone to connect with. And so how might they be able to get unstuck from a situation like that?
I have a whole section in my workbook that is just on solving that problem because it's exhausting. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. So, the thing with dating, and this goes back to your brain's not wired for happiness, our brains don't know what to do with all of the options and all of the choices and all of the data and all of the photos and the swiping. It's like that is not how our brains were evolved. Like, our brains don't know what to do with any of that. It's really overwhelming. And so one way to solve for that is to shrink the pool down instead of feeling like we're in this ocean hoping that we fish out something that'll be a good match. Now, I get when people are like, the pool already is so small. It's like, I get that. But we want to shrink it down. And so when I work with clients on dating, it's don't even go out to the apps until you have a dating blueprint. Do you know what your bottom line behaviors are that are okay and not? I call these red light, yellow light, green light behaviors. A red light might be they're married. It might be they have kids. It might be they're actively addicted to a chemical. I'm not here to tell you what your red lights need to be, but like red lights are things that are immediate disqualifiers, hard pass, we're not talking.
Mm-hmm.
Yellow lights are things they're not necessarily hard stop type things, but they're things to keep an eye on. And green lights are always okay. And then when you go out into the dating world, because your brain is essentially having a cocktail party, getting drunk once you start dating and matching and texting. We need to have a plan on the front ends that you can go back to. And okay, well, she's going through a divorce, but she's not divorced yet. Well, your red light is you don't date married people, and technically that she's married. So
Right.
if you want to be in alignment with yourself, that would be a no. If they're that wonderful and you're so worried about the one getting away, they'll wait another 6 months until they're divorced to date you. So there's that. Like dating without a plan is like building a building without a blueprint. It's like it's not going to go. You can do it, but it's not going to go well if we don't have a plan on the front end to accommodate for the brain chemistry that's going to happen inevitably when you start being in the. I've done speed and I've done dating apps, and they're not, I mean, other than the medical and legal consequences, like the initial rush and swirl and obsessive thinking is not that different.
That is wild. Yeah, I guess with a plan, and you talk to people, I guess, every day who are feeling stuck in some area of life. Would you say that most therapists and most clinicians are seeing people for specific problems or specific areas where they're feeling stuck? Or do people come to you specifically because you are just this magician wizard about how to get unstuck in life?
Thank you for that. I mean, I can't speak for most clinicians. I have people that something will happen that will then be the thing that puts them in a mindset where I will call a therapist and go out and find one. So that happens. But often the thing people think they're coming into therapy for is not actually the thing we need to solve for. So someone who's like, I don't know, I don't know whether to stay or leave my marriage. That's a really good question, but I'm not going to be able to answer that for you. So we need to figure out other things that will then make that question have a lot more clarity for you, because therapist's job is not to tell you what's true. It's to help you find out what you think is true for you.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit more about your personal journey if you're comfortable to.
Sure.
You talk a lot about a lot of, disordered eating in your past, drug use in your past, and this was all pre becoming a clinician yourself. So I'm assuming you got unstuck before you knew a lot about some of this. Is that fair to say? Or what did your journey look like, and how did you personally start getting unstuck from some of those behaviors that you don't currently have anymore?
They're not currently struggling.
Yeah.
And to be clear, I'm not free from stuckness. It wasn't like I fixed my life, became a therapist, and everything is perfect. It's a lot better and a lot more fun, but I'm still human. I still have very human moments, and I have them often. A lot of the things that helped me get unstuck came from the therapy that I'm now trained to practice. So I found my way to parts work. I was reading internal family systems book, like while I was in the middle of my stuff. It wasn't like I read the book and now everything is better, but that was a seed. I tried going to 12-step. I tried going to therapy. I tried a lot of things. I wasn't really ready to get honest about my bullshit. I was very resistant to being honest with myself about myself. So along my path, it was a lot of those little seeds. And so when I finally reached okay, I'm done, I need to make a big change, I wasn't starting from scratch. I had already explored a few things, planted some seeds. So I had at least a few things to go off of, which was, again, yay, that was great for me. Not everyone some people have to start from scratch with no idea even which way is up. I knew which way was up. I just didn't want to walk that path. And so I surrendered eventually to no one's coming to save me. I was a professional victim. I was so and granted, legitimately, was I victimized? Yes. Was that my fault? No. And there's that word again. No one's coming to save me. As an adult, we can't outsource the rescue job. It doesn't work. Like, we're born and we die solo, which means the job of rescue, and again, I'm not talking about basic needs and safety and generosity. I'm not talking about that. But the job of who am I, what am I about, and what are my choices, that's me. I can get input and guidance, but no one can do it for me. And unless I get honest about my own crap, I'm not going to go anywhere. And I got tired of my own crap.
Mm-hmm. Would you say you hit like a quote unquote rock bottom of any kind?
I always get tripped up on that one, right? Because it's like rock bottom, the way it's presented is like I hit the end and realized the error of my ways, and I had this insight, and then everything got better. that's awesome for people like who have that story. That's not mine. Mine was like, I hit rock bottom and then I grabbed a shovel and dug a path to a different rock bottom. And then I climbed out and jumped back in. It's like rock bottom is wherever you're done and you make a turn, but like you can always turn back. So
Right.
rock bottom, you can always get a bulldozer and plow through the rocks. So did I have a moment where I did have a, here's my last day doing this thing. Some of them were conscious, some not. But the last day I smoked crystal meth, that was kind of, if we have to talk about a rock bottom, that would probably be it. It was, my justification was, well, if I'm doing drugs with other people, and it's not my problem because we're doing it socially. I'm a social meth head.
Right.
That was how my little brain justified that. And talk about the voices in our head. I had my attorney in my brain was like, well, on a technicality, you're not an addict if. And then it was like 5 a.m. and I'm all alone in a really disgusting bathroom with a pipe in my hand and not a soul to be found. That was my, yep, this is my problem. So what are you going to do? So I put the pipe down and I got myself home and started telling on myself. And that was, if there was a rock bottom, that would probably be it.
Wow. Yeah, it's so wild how we can justify certain things and that justification is not one I've never heard. I hear people say I'm a social whatever with every single thing. Drinker, smoker, drug user, all different types of drugs. Like we're so good at making it okay in certain contexts and then kind of blurring the lines of, okay, well, I would never do it alone. But then you do it so many times with social people that you can't not do it alone. You just eventually get to the point where it is just you. And I do kind of believe that context of like slippery slope for certain things and certain people, especially people with addictive personalities. But it's really hard to make it okay sometimes and not have it eventually be okay in general.
Maybe for some people they can do that, but
Yeah.
I'm not here to tell someone you can't be a social whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I just know that I was full of it by saying that. It wasn't true. So for me, no, I was not a social crystal meth user. I was using crystal meth, and that is a very bad drug.
Yeah, everyone's different, and there are certain people, I guess, who can do that. I think I'd be too scared to even test the waters. But I understand that. That sounds really tough. But I love that you've kind of identified that victim mindset and saying, I am the only rescuer in this situation if I choose to show up that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes people forget that you can really only save yourself. And the other part of the book that you talk about in the chapter about getting unstuck, in the conversation of getting unstuck from your hard, is that you just have to choose your hard. They're both going to be difficult. Recovery is hard. Staying an addict is hard. Getting up and going to the gym is hard. Staying unhealthy is also hard. And it's like, which one are you going to choose? I love that framing as well.
Well, if our brain, again, if we're going with the brain science, if your brain thinks there's an easier way, it's going to go that direction because that's how your brain brains. So we need to take the idea. They say this a lot in the 12-step recovery world. It's like, it's a myth that there's an easy, softer way. Any big thing that we want, not that it all has to be a grind and a hustle and pain, but like anything that we want is going to have an element of hard to it. So, it's just so much easier to lay on the couch. If that's what you're telling yourself, you're not going to go anywhere. If it's, oh my God, it would be so nice to not be uncomfortable at the gym, but it's going to be hard to go to the gym and it's going to be really hard to feel, not energized. And I know my depression creeps in if I don't take a walk or go exercise or whatever. So if you can turn the decision from easy versus hard to hard versus hard, what now will you choose? Choose your hard. It's a lot easier to stay in the place in your brain where choices are available versus the default autopilot setting where habits hang out. And those are hard to change from that place.
Mm-hmm. No, that's brilliant. If we get into a space where we say, okay, I'm going to choose my hard, I'm going to choose the healthier option, or I'm going to go into dating with a plan this time, but then we, we get stuck again, or we procrastinate next time, or we date the person who had a red, or we binge eat again. How can we show ourselves compassion, or maybe trying to, go the right way next time, or if we ever get stuck in the future?
I have a tool for that, because the showing yourself compassion is great, but then you're just going to still be stuck. So like beating yourself up is not helpful. And just like, oh, poor baby, also not helpful. Like both of them are just not the most useful things, even though I would obviously advocate for self-compassion. It doesn't mean you're giving permission. But instead of all of that, like analysis stuff, it's like, what can you do about that? And again, knowing how the brain is organized, our brains don't like big steps and our brains don't like big changes. So my tool is called micro yeses. And a micro yes is smaller than a small step, and it's smaller than a baby step. A micro yes is a step so small that if you're not doing it, it's because it's not micro enough. Like a micro yes for working out is not take a 5-minute walk. It's sit on the couch, literally throw your left shoe by the door, and that's it. That's all you do today. Because it's like, well, I can do that. Yes. When you get that feeling in your system, like, well, that's silly. Of course I can do that. That's a micro yes. And everyone's like, well, how am I supposed to get anything done if I'm taking steps that small? But like doing micro yeses allow you to keep moving, which then builds momentum, which then releases motivation and then dopamine. So micro yeses are going to get you places a lot faster than the thing we normally do, which is set ourselves up for failure, make a big goal, stick with it for a few weeks, then we fall off, then we feel shame, then we do more of the thing that to avoid the shame, and now we're stuck on a loop. Micro yeses don't look like very much, but they are amazingly powerful for keeping you moving forward. And I would even argue, I text friends when I do a micro yes. It's like, oh my God, I threw my right shoe by the door. A workout is just a week away. But when you do micro yeses, you're keeping a promise to yourself and you're being in alignment with what you say you want to do. And all of that does amazing things for your brain chemistry. So again, it's not like do a micro yes and your whole life will get better. But I got from my former life to my current one by doing those. And the pace that you start at is not the pace you stay. I don't need to micro yes for working out like that anymore. But you do them until you get up and running, and then momentum takes over and you don't have to think about it.
That's really smart. I'm definitely a person who sets a big goal and then doesn't do it.
You and me and everybody else.
Yeah.
But like micro yeses for writing, like are not, if I sat down and told myself you're going to write 500, there are plenty of days where I'm inspired and I'm connected with the muses and the universe is channeling. Like those days are amazing.
I love that.
But there are plenty of days where I'm staring at a blank screen. A micro yes might be literally to tap out one word. All right, I'm done. But like a 1-word writing session is still a writing session. So then I'm not in a spin. And then the next time I might unlock a sentence or maybe a paragraph. And that puts me in a state of flow where then the harder things are more available. And again, I don't get stuck with writing like that anymore, but I used to. And I've worked with lots of people who want to write and they can. It's like write 1 word. If 1 word trips your brain out, write 1 letter. And that will eventually you'll be able to do more. But micro yeses, assuming you have safety and choice and access to what you need, micro yeses are going to get almost any job done.
I've heard too some people say, if you were to go work out, again, this is a little bit further than a micro yes, because it would require you to go to the gym or go to the area in your house with a yoga mat or something. And it's like work out for 2 minutes.
Too long.
And then, but sometimes they say, well, if you've committed to 2 minutes, when you're down there, you got your shoes on, you've done the 2 minutes, you're much more likely to do, another 10 or what have you, like more than you would have initially anticipated just because you've done all the pre-work to get there. And again, that is advanced level micro moving, but throwing the shoe, that's where we got to start.
Well, and you're not wrong. And we've all experienced that. I'm going to trick myself into doing the thing by telling myself I'm only going to do it for a minute. That can work. So I'm not opposed to doing that. But I also don't love it because it does break a promise to yourself. Like if I promise myself that I will only do 2 minutes, and when I work with micro yeses with clients and they're like, well, what if I do my 2 minutes or my one word and then I want to do more? And I'm like, don't do it because you told yourself it's this and we want to keep that promise because then you're going to get really incented and feel motivated to hit it again and then hit it again. If you go over what you told yourself, your parts might get a little, like the parts of your mind might go, wait, you promised it was only going to be 2 minutes and now it's 10. So next time you want to do this, I'm not going to believe you. And
Mm.
so it does break a little bit of the internal trust. So does it work? Yes, but I don't love it.
Oh, that's really interesting. I've not heard that perspective, but that sounds true. and and you're right. You are kind of going over because my fear with doing that was always, okay, well, I'm just going to learn that it doesn't actually mean going down there for 2 minutes and then I'll feel obligated. And then it's like, oh, I actually just don't want to work out for 20 minutes, even though it's supposed to be the two.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk as well, the conversation around getting unstuck. You talk about a chess analogy and life kind of being like a chess game. Tell us a little bit about what this is and what that means.
So I wrote this, I wrote the end of the book when The Queen's Gambit was
Oh
playing
my
on
God, I love
Netflix,
that
which is like,
show.
I don't play chess, but I loved The Queen's Gambit. Like, I
Hmm.
thought that was one of the best shows I've ever seen, ever, anywhere, like at all. So I've seen it more times than I care to admit. Um, and so I was watching that show and the idea that all of these moves that we're trying to make in our lives, if you think of it like a chess game, chess is about strategy and about thinking 3 moves forward. And sometimes you have to sacrifice one piece to get movement in another. And I'm like, that's a really great analogy to being stuck. Like, if I can't move my piece, maybe instead of focusing on how bad I want to move this pawn and how much I really wish I could move this pawn, and if I could only move my pawn 2 squares, it's like, yeah, but your guy over here is open. Like, go there. Because if you move this one, that unlocks the board. And it's very true with our choices. If you're so hung up on, do I stay or go out of this relationship? Do I quit or stay at this job? If you focus on that one thing, you're going to miss all the other available moves that you have. And sometimes those side moves unlock the problem that you have right in front of you. So I really love, even though I can't play chess, I'm not strategic in that way. I'm strategic with life goals and the life chess, but sitting and playing chess, I'm not a math person. It makes my head hurt. So, yeah, life is a game of chess.
Yeah, I played a little bit of chess on the weekend because there was a chessboard at this Airbnb I was at. And my husband's really mathy and plays chess. And I was just like guessing. Luckily, we had a draw one time, which was like the closest I'll ever get to a win. But I totally agree that, yeah, I'm not a chess person. But that analogy was really, really helpful to read through of there's so many different options. And even just looking at your life, kind of expanding out of that narrow view of the problem. It's like, okay, work might not be going super great, but, this is going really well. And, oh my gosh, this is something we're celebrating, and just kind of seeing all these other areas where you can celebrate or just feel a little bit of gratitude even. And yeah, figuring out new ways to kind of move through problems, and maybe it'll unlock something else that is,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
And it's not about toxic positivity. It's not just focus on the positive. No. It's see the whole board. If you're looking at your board, you're going to see the stuck pieces and the pieces that got, tossed aside. And you're going to see there's the and word again. And you're going to see all of your choices, because when our brains are conscious and aware of choices, it will be less reactive, which will make us less stuck, which will then help us logically know which choices we want to make. And that creates sort of an up spiral, which is good. I've done the downward spiral and the upward spiral. The up one is so much better.
I bet. Absolutely. If there is one thing you want the audience to take away from your book, this episode, what would you want that message to be?
There's no such thing as a broken person. Like, our bodies can break and our hearts can break, yes, but there's no such thing as a broken person. Everyone's symptoms, everyone's stuff makes sense in context, and brains can change. Like, with like, I was like, "This is just who I am. This is just the way I am. I have an addicted personality and I have terrible taste in partners and this is just me." It's like, nope, brains can change. Brains grow and change and build new pathways and new highways. So if you're hearing this, there is change and it is available for you.
So we've got your book, The Science of Stuck. You also have a workbook to go along with it. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then also about your upcoming book? Because I'm so excited. You just shared that you have another one on the
I
horizon.
do. Yeah. I'm done for a while after the third one. So the work I wrote The Science of Stuck to be really practical and easy, but for some people they don't even want to read a practical and easy book. They just want, like, what do I do? Give me stuff to do. I need stuff to do. I don't want to read the entire blog post about the recipe's origin. I just want to know how much sugar, how much flour, how much butter. Like, I don't want to scroll. So the workbook is designed to go along with all of the topics in Science of Stuck, but you don't need to read one to do the other. It's like if you just want to jump in and start doing stuff, the workbook is divided into procrastination, anxiety, relationship and boundaries, things like that, creativity. Wherever you're stuck, there's a section in the workbook with stuff that hopefully will be helpful.
I love that. And what about your next?
Oh, yeah. And the third book is called Align Your Mind, and it is about parts work and all those different parts of you and how to help them all get along with each other. So I'm super excited for that one.
Oh my goodness, that sounds so awesome. And yeah, I just can't tell you enough how much I loved this book. I thought it was so interesting and a really easy read, like just really easy to digest and understand. I know in this conversation we've talked a little bit about maybe words that people are unfamiliar with if they don't know a lot of therapy language, but it's really, really digestible and super accessible. So if any of you are curious about it, highly, highly recommend picking up a copy. Where can people get connected with you?
So yeah, my website is scienceofstuck.com. You can find me on Instagram at Britt Frank, and Britt has 2 T's. And then you can buy The Science of Stuck and the Getting Unstuck workbook on Amazon or wherever you buy books.
Yes, and we will absolutely link that in the show notes as well. Britt, thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.